It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Folks, welcome to the program. We've got State Representative Stephen Meeks is calling in from Faulkner County. That's district there, 67 he represents. Representative Meeks, thanks for joining us this morning.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Hey, first off, Stephen, I want to talk about the Faulkner County Tea Party Luncheon, where, I was there last week. You were there as well. And I referenced the fact that you are always the guy who motions for adjournment. And now that has to do with seniority, right?
Right, yeah. Based upon tradition, the senior member of the House always does the adjourn motion.
Okay, so you're the senior member. You always do the adjournment. Yeah. And so that actually means that you hold a record. Is that correct?
Yes, because that's the motion that gets passed every day, and so I make, as you said, I make that motion, and so I hold the record for basically every General Assembly for being the representative who gets the most motions passed.
Well, there you go. I mean,
yep.
And that's
it's an easy one, of course. But, yep.
I know, but hey, that is.
Someone's got to do it.
If you wanted to be deceptive, you could put that on mailers, and people would be like, "Oh, wow, he gets things done." Anyway, I thought that was an interesting piece of trivia. Anyway, but I wanted to talk a little bit about back a couple months ago, or more than a couple at this point. There was the appropriations process. You had the Joint Budget Committee's meeting. And, well, just go ahead and tell us what – there was a problem, right? People were asking for way more money than they spent, right?
Right. So just a little bit of background for folks that are not familiar with the process. The appropriation process, what that does is that sets spending limits for state agencies and tells them, what's the maximum amount of money they can spend in each category. And those categories are generally salaries, operations, conference and travel, capital improvements, things like that. And a lot of times what we were finding was that the amount of money that they spent was way less than the appropriation authority they were asking. So, for example, they may have spent, say, $1 million, just to keep the number simple. They may have spent $1 million on their operating expenses, but they were asking for $3 million worth of spending authority. And there is some justification sometimes for allowing some large caps like that. For example, the road department or the forestry department. This last summer, it was a relatively quiet summer. We didn't have a lot of wildfires in the state, and so their expenses were low. Next summer, that may not be the case, and there may be more wildfires, and so their expenses are high. And so we want to leave them a little bit of headroom there so that they don't have to come back to us and for nickel and dime stuff, so to speak, for them to be able to carry out what their mission is. But we found in a lot of cases that wasn't the case, that the appropriation spending authority levels were way more than what they were actually spending. Now, some people will argue that, the appropriation is not real money. The real money comes later in the Revenue Stabilization Act. But what the appropriation does, though, it allows the General Assembly to maintain control of spending levels. And so myself, Representative Dotson, and several of the other conservative members started saying, no, we need to get these appropriations more in line with what your actual spending is. And if something does come along, a federal grant or whatnot, you can always come back to us and ask for approval. And that way it helps to keep the people's elected representatives in the loop of what's going on. And so we made a motion last time, and we got it passed, that said that if they wanted to spend greater than 10%, or they wanted spending authority more than 10% of what they had actually spent, that they had to start justifying that to us. During the fiscal session, we were, with some limited success, some of the conservatives, we were able to rein some of that stuff back in, but it always felt like the other members were asking permission from the agency. Hey, is it okay if we do this? Hey, it's okay if we do this. And I'm thinking, we're the representatives. We don't need to be asking them for permission. We need to just do it and put it back in line. So we were able to get this 10% justification passed. And since we did that, the agencies are putting their appropriation requests much better in line with what their actual spending is. And there's been a couple agencies that have come in where Representative Dotson, who's actually chairing the committee now, has told agencies, for example, the Heritage Department came to us a couple weeks ago with theirs, and Representative Dotson, because of a lot of questions from the members and because of this initiative, he told them basically they needed to roll their sleeves up, sharpen their pencils, and go back and come back with a appropriation request that was better in line with what their actual spending was. And, you know, they came back about a week and a half later, and they knocked $5 million off their appropriation request.
Wow, 1.5 million or 5 million?
1.5 million.
Okay. So
and
that sounds pretty. I mean, it sounds to me like, first of all, what were they asking? Do you remember how much more they were asking for than what they had spent?
They were asking. Well, it was at $1.5 million is the authority that they were asking for. The original number I don't remember, but it's over. I think it's like over $100 million budget, because they've got the Department of Heritage has several sub departments, and so all those appropriations, they add up. But anyways, some of the departments of higher ed, some of the community colleges, some of those were we came back in, tens of millions of dollars. And so overall, we're not through with the budget process yet. We've got this week and next week, and we've already got them dropped. $2.8 billion is how much appropriation authority we've reined in just the last couple of weeks.
We're talking with State Representative Stephen Meeks. It seems like this is certainly a move in the right direction, Stephen, because if it's capped at 10%, and they do have an opportunity to get more from a grant or something like that, they don't just get it; they have to now come back before you. So it's like, well, we're asking once, and you know what? We're going to have to ask twice, which actually is you guys exercising more authority and being a check on these executive agencies. But
right.
Here's a question though that and this may I may not this may not be in line with what you're thinking, but why don't departments roll over any extra money that they would get and just not request more? You know what I mean? Can you address that? This is just me talking from somebody who has to budget my own household.
Sure. There's actually two different. Those are almost apples and oranges, because we do allow some agencies to roll over what's called a carryover fund, and it depends on the mission of the agency whether they're allowed to do that. A lot of them, any excess revenue they have either comes back to the Treasury or just stays in the Treasury, and it doesn't go out to them. But when they roll it over, then that rollover itself then also becomes subject to the appropriation. So, for example, let's say it's an agency that has a $100 million a year budget, and at the end of the year they've got $10 million left over. So what ends up happening is they roll that $10 million over, and then now from the Treasury they may only need $90 million to complete their mission that year. So it ends up saving the taxpayers money.
Right.
But that still falls under the appropriation level. So if we cap the appropriation at $110 million, that doesn't mean that that $10 million they've rolled over, they suddenly go out on a spending spree and spend more than what the appropriation authority allows. They're still capped at that appropriation authority. So that prevents them from going out and hey, we've got an extra $10 million, so we're going to blow it on whatever. They still have to. It still has to fall in that. And one of the things I'm also noticing is there's been a change in the mindset. I heard one of the directors talk about we're trying to rein in our mission creep, and those are things we didn't. When I was first elected and we were under Democrat state control, those are things I never heard.
So define mission creep. Define mission creep for the audience.
Mission creep, what that is a state agency is tasked to do a certain mission, but over time they develop programs that start getting into other areas, and before long the tasks that they're doing are well beyond the scope of what they originally were set up. And so some of the directors are trying to rein that back in and say, no, that's not an area that we're supposed to be in. Either it belongs to another agency, or it's not something that we should be involved in. And so they're reining it back in, trying to focus on what the core mission of what they were designed to do. And a lot of that has to do with leadership from the governor's office down, and some of the people that he's put in place, some of his directors that have a more conservative view of what government is supposed to do.
So would you say that the mission creep, in the past, that can drive spending? Because what we see a lot of times, like you were saying with these agencies, it's almost like there's never a point where we say, okay, we funded X amount of dollars, mission accomplished. The agency accomplished what it set out to accomplish this year. But instead, we kind of have, this idea where no, we need more money next year than we got last year, and
Right, and we're starting to see that culture change. And again, unfortunately, this doesn't make the news as much as I think it should. But we had another director of the pharmacy board, for example, came before us, and the number of pharmacists in the state is growing, and so because of that, the licensing, all that is becoming not more complicated, but there's more paperwork and more work to do because you're overseeing maybe twice as many pharmacists as there used to be. And what the agency decided to do is, instead of hiring more full-time people, is they're hiring during, say, the summer or spring break, they're hiring college interns to come in, let them help with that extra load for a couple of weeks. And what it does is it gets those college interns, gives them some real-world working experience, gets them the chance to get some work experience, and that saves the state from having to hire 2 or 3 or 4 new employees. And so that's another thing. Under the governor, we have reduced the size of the number of state employees by 1,500, and so as time goes on, we'll continue to work towards trying to make government more efficient at trying to get done the job that it's supposed to be doing.
We're talking with State Representative Stephen Meeks, State Representative for District 67. Now, that's what part of Faulkner County is that, Stephen?
It's Central Faulkner County. It's Western Conway, Greenbrier, Bologna.
Okay. So we're running out of time here. Last question, though. What do you see some of the big issues? I know you talked generally just now about shrinking government, but what do you see some of the big issues that are coming down the pike in this session? Some people talk roads. Others maybe look at some of the battles we fought last year with internet sales tax. Of course, now it's the Supreme Court says that's constitutional. What are your thoughts?
I think the roads and taxes are going to be two of the large things we're going to be talking about. For me, as chair of the Technology Committee, I'm looking at some of the ways that the state government, how the agencies are sharing data with each other, looking for efficiencies there, also cybersecurity. I'm also looking at, and unfortunately we probably won't have time to get into this, there's a new technology coming down the line that allows companies to microchip their employees, and I'm looking at putting in legislation in place to regulate how that happens so that an employee doesn't feel like they're forced to take it, that it remains a voluntary, when that technology does come to our state.
Yeah, that is terrifying. That is terrifying. Yeah. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. There's places in Wisconsin that have already done it. There's an article in the BBC came out in the last day or so about companies that are looking to do that to employees in Britain. So, that technology is coming, and unless we get the rules in place for it now, it could create quite a mess. So,
well, I definitely want to research that. That is something else. State Representative Stephen Meeks, appreciate you spending some time with us this morning, sir, and talking about that appropriation process. It can be confusing to the average person who's not down there every day, and appreciate the work you're doing. Okay.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it, and happy belated Veterans Day to our veterans, and happy service people.
Absolutely. Stephen Meeks, everybody.